Well, today is the day, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated as the President of the United States. Again, the 47th president. So what does Trump actually plan to do? Well, let's start with a fan favourite, deportations. Trump has promised the largest scale deportations program in the history of the world. Not just America, the history of the world. And why does America need this program? Well, the answer is quite simple. During the 4 years, just 4 years that Biden was president, 15 million people crossed into America illegally and are still presumably in America, the vast majority of them. That's a staggering number. That's 5% of the American population crossed illegally in just the last 4 years. So yes, this absolutely does need to be done. And actually, the American people are crying out for it. I saw a poll which said 86% of the American people support this policy. The other 15% are probably in America illegally. Now, what's really fascinating is that actually a lot of people are choosing to self-deport in a way. They're choosing to leave and go back to their own countries prior to Trump even taking office.
Some migrants are already choosing to leave the country voluntarily. News Nation's Jorge Ventura joins us live from San Antonio, Texas this morning with more on this story. Jorge, how many migrants are we actually seeing doing this, leaving voluntarily?
Right now, Marky, it's unclear, but we are starting to see a trend, and this comes as cities across the U.S. and Mexico are now bracing for President-elect's deportation operation. But his hardline messaging on those deportation efforts have some migrants panicking and some even choosing now to self-deport back to their home countries. I spoke with immigration attorney Rolando Vasquez, who tells me that some of the immigrants that he represents that entered under the Biden administration are now choosing to return home, fearing deportation under the incoming administration.
Straight away, you're probably thinking, what about countries that do not want to take their own citizens back? Well, Trump has an answer for that, and it's quite simple. If a country says we're not taking those citizens back, Trump will effectively place such significant sanctions on that country that it will destroy their economy.
In terms of your mass deportation plans, have you had any preliminary discussions with countries like Venezuela, from where the Trinidad gang is now popping up?
They'll take them back.
They're going to take him back?
They're all taking them back, yep. And if they don't, they'll be met very harshly economically. Okay, they'll all take them back. You know, Venezuela and other countries were not behaving very well with us during my administration, and within 24 hours they were behaving very well. They'll all take them back.
Pretty quickly, they're going to fold to America. Not only that, Mexico, for example, are so afraid of these sanctions and how it would implode the Mexican economy, but they've said that they're willing to take non-Mexican deportees from America into Mexico. That's actually staggering, and it shows just how powerful America really is when they're actually willing to wield their power, when they have someone with a bit of courage as the President of the United States. Bravo. Well, whilst we were just talking about how Trump wants to get the population of America down, he actually also wants to get the landmass of America up. Now, he plans to do this by taking 3 parts of the world and making them America, literally. Those 3 parts of the world are the Panama Canal, Greenland, and even Canada. Let's start with Canada because it's different from the others. It's a modern, developed country with a very large population, and it shares a border with the United States. Well, as far as Trump is concerned, Canada really contributes very little to America. In fact, it's the other way around. Trump's view is that America is subsidizing the existence of Canada through about $250 billion worth of imports from Canada into the United States. And so I think, especially when it comes to Trump and his use of tariffs, he sees an opportunity here. Why tariff Canada when you can just make it the 51st state? He frequently refers to Prime Minister Trudeau as the governor of Canada. And I think he's at least half serious in this. Take a listen.
I called him Governor Trudeau because they should be the 51st state, really. It would make a great state. And the people of Canada like it. They'd pay lower taxes. They have virtually no military. They have a very small military. They pay less than 1%. They're about the lowest payer in NATO. They're supposed to pay much more. They haven't been paying. I think that there's, you know, it was stated pretty strongly a couple of weeks ago about Canada, and people laughed. And now they're all saying, well, It's very interesting. They've taken about 20% of our car business. I'd rather do it here. We could put tariffs on. We don't have tariffs on them yet, but they will. That will happen. But they've taken about 20% of our car business. I'd rather have it done in Detroit or have it done in South Carolina or any other state that does cars, and we have a lot of them. But we don't need anything. We don't need their fuel. We don't need their energy. We don't need their oil and gas. We don't need anything that they have. And I said to Trudeau, I said, why are we subsidizing you $200 and $250 billion a year? He said, I really don't know. And I said, well, I don't know either. I said, what would happen to Canada if we didn't? He said, Canada would be obliterated if that happened. I said, then Canada should be a 51st state. And that's where we are now.
Now, everything that Trump has said there is absolutely true. The Canadian economy is entirely dependent on America, and they do spend about 1% of their GDP on defense spending, which is really very little. America spends 5%, and they have a much larger GDP. There's nothing militarily or economically that Canada could do to resist America annexing it. But I wouldn't recommend it, and here's why I wouldn't recommend it. Because Canada shares a border with America. Now, in the future, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, or 50 years, something is going to go wrong. And what you're going to have are Canadian nationalists who remember the good old glory days of when Canada was an independent state. And you'll probably end up with all kinds of Canadian nationalist parties and strife and possibly even the kinds of things that we saw with the troubles with the island. I would say it's just not really worth it. And is that really Trump's plan? I'm sure he could annex Canada militarily if he really wanted to. But I think his plan is probably to suggest some things that are so outrageous that he can effectively bend whoever the next Canadian Prime Minister is to his will. He can force them to do pretty much whatever he wants because they know that he's a bit of a wild card, a bit of a loose cannon, Donald Trump. Now, whilst Canada is unlikely to become the 51st state of America, Greenland is a different story. Now, Greenland really is a vital national strategic interest to America. It has access to an enormous amount of the northern coastline of Russia. But not only that, there are these really important new trade routes that are opening up through the Arctic that can be accessed very easily from Greenland.
Well, we need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time.
Get this, only about 60,000 people actually live on Greenland. So America could afford to give every single Greenlander $1 million, and it would still be an amazing deal. That would only cost about $60 billion, which is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of acquiring an entire landmass the size of Greenland is a pretty good deal. I imagine most Greenlanders would go for it as well, that's for sure. There is one small hitch, which is that Greenland is possibly maybe technically a little bit owned and controlled by the Danish. Greenlanders, some of them disagree with that and dispute that. But look, 68% of people on Greenland, well, they want independence from Denmark. And at least 60% of people from Greenland, when polled, want closer relationships with America. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would support becoming an American state, but they're at least very America friendly. Trump certainly seems to think that he could do a deal here, that he could effectively buy Greenland. And there are definitely some Greenlanders who agree with him.
I'm here in Greenland. This kid's got a MAGA hat on. What's your message to Donald Trump?
Buy Greenland.
Buy Greenland.
Buy Greenland. Buy Greenland. No more Danish. No more Danish. We don't like Danish people.
And lastly, you have the Panama Canal, which is a canal that runs through Panama. And it was built primarily to facilitate much faster shipping routes. And who built it? Well, the Americans built it, and they controlled it for 60 years until ultimately Jimmy Carter, as president, gave it away. This is something that Trump views as a terrible mistake that has harmed the American people. And Trump is very keen to rectify that mistake. Now, if this all sounds a little bit familiar to you, it might be because we have a Prime Minister who is also seemingly very desperate to give up our own sovereign territory. Anyway, the thing I find very fascinating about the Panama Canal and Greenland is that Trump was asked by a reporter whether he would rule out using economic and military measures to capture these areas. And here's his answer.
Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you
The next item on Trump's to-do list is something that I think will affect most people around the world. It'll certainly affect me, and it'll probably affect you as well. And it's all to do with social media. You see, following the January the 6th insurrections at the Capitol building in America, Trump was basically deplatformed from every social media site. In fact, this was so significant that he had to go on and create his own platform, Truth Social, which was basically a clone of Twitter. Now, there are a number of ways that Trump can do this. He can deregulate, he can change laws, and he can just apply a bit of presidential pressure. But ultimately, I think this is a good thing, because for too long now, social media companies have been suspending accounts, not of people who've broken the law or committed crimes, but just because they hold controversial views or their posts contain controversial opinions. And very often that has been used as a tool of the state. You have MI5, MI6, the NSA, the FBI, all collaborating and sending messages to these social media bosses saying, please delete this account. No more of that, thank you very much. We really don't need it. And some of these social media bosses clearly seem to have got the idea already. Listen to what Mark Zuckerberg had to say.
So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
But what about the economy? Well, if you're a millionaire in America right now, actually, you're probably doing okay. The stock market is booming, crypto is booming, the housing market is booming, just a little bit too much, quite frankly. But if you're an ordinary citizen, things are really tough. The cost of groceries are really high, the price of rent is really high, energy costs too high. Now, Trump thinks he's got a bit of a silver bullet to bring all of those costs for ordinary working people down. And that silver bullet is energy. But how does he plan to bring energy prices down?
If elected president again, what is the first thing you would do to help bring down the cost to make things more affordable?
Drill, baby, drill.
Well, you heard it there. Drill, baby, drill. It's a lefty's absolute nightmare. You see, America has enormous amounts of untapped oil and gas reserves, and Trump's plan is basically to just use America's natural resources that were given to her by God to bring the price of energy down drastically. In doing so, the cost of things like transportation and food comes down. Refrigerating food, those prices come down. And so ultimately those cost savings can be passed on to the consumer. At least that's the plan, assuming that greedy companies don't get in the way and just pocket the difference. We'll see how Trump deals with that, because that is a very real prospect and a very real possibility. But this is an amazing plan. I love it. It reduces the stranglehold that Arab countries have over the global energy market. And all at the same time, it just makes life better for the American people. Now, arguably, America's biggest problem is actually its debt. You see, America as a country owes $36 trillion in debt, which means, for perspective, that in 2024, they had to spend over $800 billion just servicing this debt alone. Every single American taxpayer is over $300,000 in debt. That is absolutely staggering. So what's Trump going to do to bring the size of the deficit and hopefully the debt as well down? Well, that's why he's brought in Elon Musk. You see, Elon Musk is pretty good at taking over a company, stripping it to its bare bones whilst still making it functional and making it profitable again. That is exactly what he did with Twitter when he turned it into X. And Musk's plan is to reduce the number of federal departments by 75%, basically creating enormous cost savings by cutting out people and jobs in the federal government that just aren't really adding enough value. They're just a net drag on the taxpayer. Good stuff. Let me just give you a bit of perspective about that number as well. $880 billion every year servicing the debt. That is exactly the same amount of money, within $2 billion, that it costs to run the American military. America could double the size of its military if it wasn't servicing this debt constantly. Not that America needs to double its military, and I hope they don't, because if they did, God knows what they'd get up to. Unfortunately, in the space of a short YouTube video, I cannot go into absolutely everything that Trump plans to do. He also plans to leave the World Health Organization and abandon the Paris Climate Accords. Two decisions I thoroughly agree with. But I'll leave you with this parting thought. If Trump is able to implement all of the policies that he wants to, I think you will see a golden age for the American people. America will once again become a land of prosperity and opportunity. And once that happens, once America is wealthier, safer, more stable, what are people in Europe going to make of it? Are they going to start wanting a little bit of this for themselves? I think it's very realistic they will. And so you'll see this kind of Trumpian MAGA philosophy spreading throughout Europe. It already is to an extent, but I think it will grow on the example of America successfully implementing it. That's my final thought. Let me know what you think. Leave a like, a comment, subscribe if you're not already. And I don't have a cap, but till the next one.